Due Process, recipient of 6 Mid-Atlantic Emmy Awards.
Cowboys and Indians first, and then cops and robbers.
So did you tell the class I'm going to kill all of you?
No.
But that was the charge against these two 8-year-olds who found themselves suspended and arrested for threatening their classmates with a piece of notebook paper folded in the shape of a gun. Zero tolerance, gone too far? Up next on this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding is provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual.
In Arkansas, a kid is suspended for pointing a chicken finger at a teacher. In Pennsylvania, a 6-year-old is sent home for 10 days because he brought a nail clipper to school. And here in New Jersey, it's more of the same. An 11-year-old Newark girl handcuffed and arrested for snipping a lock of hair from a classmate. A Rahway High School boy suspended for carrying a miniature wooden bat in school. I'm Raymond Brown, and it all comes down to 2 words: zero tolerance. It's a get-tough policy that swept the country and this state, but it comes with plenty of controversy, as we'll find out here in the studio. But first, here's Sandy King with a rather astounding case out of Irvington. Sandy?
Raymond, it's a case that made national headlines, even in this post-Columbine climate. First, there was the age of the kids involved. Then there was their so-called crime. They were only 8 years old, in the 2nd grade. And though there is some discrepancy over what they said and did, one thing was clear. Their weapon was just a piece of paper, folded and drawn to resemble a gun, but still just a piece of paper. So we spent some time with Amadi and Shaquille.
All you gotta do is move a couple of times. He shot me all the way over there.
Playing at violence. It's as commonplace as kids and cartoons and video games.
What a move!
But in the wake of real carnage in places like Columbine, in schools across the country these days, even the slightest hint of violence is enough to trigger alarm. Witness one day last year in Irvington.
I got this call stating that my son was at the police station. I like police station. I'm thinking something happened to him, you know, not thinking that, oh, he's down in the police station over a paper gun.
A paper gun fashioned from a notebook page in the hands of these 2 kids, then 8-year-old 2nd graders who say they were playing cops and robbers. Did you tell the class I'm going to kill all of you?
No.
But that's what the police report said, that the boys with their paper gun threatened to kill their classmates. Could anybody have mistaken that for a gun?
Let me tell you something. If you would have seen it, you would have laughed. They actually took this piece of paper, white notebook paper, and stuck it in a plastic bag, like it was evidence, like you put a real gun in there.
And though even now, nearly 1 year later, officials aren't talking about the case, from the teacher who first lodged the report, to the acting principal who called the cops, to local police who turned the boys over to county authorities, to the Essex prosecutor who took it to court, the explanation seems to have been based in 3 words.
Zero tolerance policy.
A national policy designed to prevent the kind of violence that was mass murder at Columbine High School.
You gotta come in.
A policy that this father says was the school board president's justification for bringing in police to deal with 2 8-year-olds.
She gonna get up there and say, I didn't want this to be another Columbine. You as an official, and you don't know a gun from a piece of paper, and you trying to compare this to Columbine?
But police not only responded to the call, They took the two boys down to headquarters in two separate police cars and held them at the station for nearly 4 hours. Their fathers were called and joined the wait.
They didn't say anything to us.
Did you realize your child was being arrested?
No. I didn't. I arrested for what?
Hamadi, what did you think was going on?
I think they was trying to.
8 years old.
At the time, yes.
I don't know.
Were these children arrested?
In the sense that they were put in police cars and they were brought down to police headquarters, and it was not within their ability to leave, they were arrested.
Terroristic threats. Do you know what that means?
Yep.
What does it mean?
I threatened somebody.
Did you?
Nope.
2 weeks and 2 court hearings later, the charges were dismissed. That was last April. But for the two boys and their fathers, it is still not over. There's the impact on the children.
He's more afraid. He's heard about it. He's heard about it. If it is possible for me to have him at home getting tutored, I have him at home.
Hamadi now is in private school because if anybody can get confused over a white piece of notebook paper and get 2 kids a criminal record over a piece of notebook paper, my son can't go to school in Irvington no more.
And though the charges were dismissed, each boy now has a juvenile record.
Only one way to get rid of that record. That's by way of a formal expungement proceeding.
They're trying to say that these 2 little babies got a record into the 18 for playing with a piece of paper.
It got my mind wondering about this society, just like him, and he's a kid. And he's asking me grown-up questions.
To the basketball rim.
It isn't fair in a case like this. It isn't fair when the charges shouldn't have been brought in the first place. It isn't fair when you see your child go through what these children have gone through. It isn't fair to have to go through an expense to do that. It just isn't fair in light of the facts that occurred in this case.
But it is the way it is.
That's the system.
It's just 1 year since the paper gun caper, and just last week there was vindication for one of the boys. After rallies and protests and a lawsuit, Hamadi's name was finally cleared. At the order of the court, the record of his bizarre arrest expunged. Not so far for his buddy Jakeel. Unless his folks go the same costly court route, he'll keep that juvenile record of arrest until he is 18. Both families, meanwhile, may sue for damages, which they say would just be fair, given the damage that was done to their kids in the name of zero tolerance.
Still, proponents insist that while there may be examples of overzealous application, the policy itself is sound. The case for zero tolerance and against it when we come back, so stay with us.
Well, I think obviously the world has changed a lot, and you know, 5-10 years ago, if somebody had a paper gun or a paper, any type of object that was, made of paper that could be potentially dangerous, wouldn't be looked at the same way it is today.
They made them, and everybody saw it was paper. And all day they're watching television and they see guns.
I think the teacher could have just talked to them and said, look, we just don't want you playing with paper guns because we're afraid that you're going to start something.
Small children, you put too many limits on them, and they don't really understand all that's going on, and when you limit what they do, they don't get an opportunity to learn anything.
Nowadays, our society is very preoccupied with what's done wrong and what's done right, and sometimes it's taken too far in the context of little kids who are so free and so open-minded. You can't, put the blame on them for past sins committed by adults.
No one wants to see school violence, but is zero tolerance the way to stop it? Emmanuel Ben-Avraham, president of Life Skills Academy, who's been working with at-risk and violent and even jailed kids since the days when we knew him as Shahid Watson, says it's not a bad idea to bring some tough love to the classroom. But we'll get some serious disagreement from Ellen Boylan of the Education Law Center, an expert in student discipline law. And from Newark, we'll hear from Assemblyman Paul DiGaetano, who's got legislation pending that would toughen those laws in New Jersey. Ellen, let me start with you. It seems as though the question is whether the horror stories we read about kids who seem to be involved in trivial matters but get punished more seriously, are those aberrations, or do they really undermine confidence in zero tolerance as a policy?
Well, I think they're not aberrations. You know, any day you open up the newspaper, you can read a case like that, the trivial punishment case from anywhere around the country. I think they highlight one of the problems with zero tolerance, which is that in the broad sweep of being tough, in that net, you gather up innocent kids who are just being kids. The other problem with zero tolerance is that it's resulting in mass exclusion of lots of kids from school and denying educational opportunity to kids, both who engage in the trivial conduct and children who have more serious issues.
Assemblyman Ellen points to trivial conduct, and there obviously is more controversy than one might have expected about zero tolerance. Let me read you a quote from a Miami columnist named Leonard Pitts. He says, "It may seem like a good idea once, but zero tolerance has proven to be one of the most half-witted, moronic, asinine, foolish, daft, dumb, and yes, stupid philosophies ever imposed on anyone, anybody, at any time, anywhere." That's extreme, but you would have thought maybe at one time that zero tolerance would be like mom and apple pie. Why has there been controversy?
Well, I guess it depends on what the context of zero tolerance is. For example, in New Jersey, we have since 1995 had a law in the books that's zero tolerance for guns. That means any student who brings a gun to school or is adjudicated delinquent for possessing a gun on school property or committing a crime with a gun shall be removed from the setting. Now, I think that's zero tolerance, and I think that's good. If someone makes a terroristic threat and it's not done as part of a game, if someone threatens to blow up the school or the class or all their classmates, I think we want to have zero tolerance for that. It's not an issue of zero tolerance for somebody drawing a paper gun. It's what's done once they draw that paper gun, what they say to their classmates, and what context they say that. And I think that makes a big difference.
Right. Now, Emmanuel, let me bring you into the discussion. I know that among the many issues about which you've been concerned, lifetime, is racial justice. And the statistics suggest that, maybe not surprisingly, black kids and black males in particular are disproportionately the subject of punishment under zero tolerance policies. Does that trouble you? Do you think that has any meaning at all?
Well, Raymond, anytime there's racial injustice in America, it troubles me, especially being a black man in America. However, we can no longer allow our young people to bring guns, drugs, act violently in our schools and tolerate it. We cannot have that and be disruptive. One of the alarming things as a grassroots person that I'm finding today is the increase of gang violence. We have an increase of Bloods and Crips and those that are operating within the hip-hop culture that is tearing apart the very fabric of our educational system.
Is it your position then that what seems like a disproportionate punishment of black males is because they in fact deserve higher degrees of discipline?
No, I'm not saying that either. What I am saying is that there need to be balance across the board, no matter if you're in an urban setting or a suburban setting or a rural setting. We must act and put the pressure on our legislatures to make sure that this is being acted upon across the board and being consistent and balanced.
Emmanuel has talked about Bloods and Crips, which conjures up serious issues of gang violence, at least images of that. Is that what we're talking about primarily in terms of the disciplinary conduct that is the subject of the zero tolerance policy?
Well, I think we're talking about serious and not serious behaviors, and that's part of the problem with zero tolerance. Inherent in the concept of zero tolerance is this conflict or problem of punishing trivial offenses, because zero tolerance is aimed at deterrence. Its purpose is let's get tough so that no one breaks the rules, and if that's how you're going to approach children, then you're going to punish the innocent and the trivial with the serious matter. The problem is when you have zero tolerance, you leave no room for an individualized assessment of the child. No one's looking at motive, intent, circumstance. It's did you break the rule? Someone makes that judgment. If you broke the rule, you're punished, and the punishment is denial of educational opportunity. That's inherent in zero tolerance, and I think what we have to get back to is remembering that we can have good, sound discipline policies that set rules, that make it clear to everyone what is allowed and what is not allowed. That's equally enforced, fairly enforced, without zero tolerance.
Assemblyman DiCaetano, let me focus you on a part of Ellen Boylan's critique. She says that trivial punishment is inherent in zero tolerance, and the video that Sandy King showed us at the top of the program reflects a good place to start. Here are two 8-year-olds who have a paper gun, with which they ostensibly threaten someone and are then arrested. Is that in the realm of zero tolerance because there was something that looked like a gun? Or is it the kind of trivial punishment that Ellen Boylan says is typical of zero tolerance?
Well, Ray, I think that could be considered zero tolerance, but not under the legislation that was sponsored and passed into law in 1995, because it doesn't address paper handguns. Now, I don't know that case other than what I saw moments ago. If it was just a case where two students drew a paper handgun and were playing with it, I would say no, that does not apply to any zero tolerance law. But if they threaten their classmates with it and threaten to kill all of them or bring a real one in the next day or blow them up, then I think it does.
Well, let me hold you accountable for that which you inspire as opposed to what you literally do as a legislator. That is, right. We know that the legislation talked about guns, but clearly zero tolerance has become a policy, or at least a set of practices inspired by that, but which have now extended across the nation and even throughout New Jersey to conduct that goes beyond what was in that first bill that you've talked about. And to the extent that it's been tied to the idea of zero tolerance, do you think it's gone too far in terms of nail clippers and in terms of paper guns?
Well, let me say this, Ray. Our law was 1995. It predated Columbine. It predated September 11th. I think both of those occurrences have given new meaning to zero tolerance. The parents of other school children in that school or any other school, I think, would say the same that we believe in the legislature. No student should sit in a classroom where he or she feels threatened. No one should be able to physically or verbally threaten another student in a school setting. No one should be able to bring a gun in to do that, a knife, etc.
Was it right to arrest the 8-year-olds if, in fact, they said with a paper gun, "We're going to kill you"? They said those words. Let's assume that.
Well, I would say, not having been there, I don't know, except to say this. If they said, "I'm going to kill," or "We're going to kill all of you," with a serious face, and they weren't playing any games, then I think it was right to remove them from the classroom and deal with it. And that's really what zero tolerance is all about, that they should be removed and dealt with.
Let me bring my other two guests in.
I would say that, we need to also look at, proper counseling and other means and measure to address that, but we have to be concerned about the state and the mind of our young people today. Also on the clip, you saw where the kids were at home playing a video game that represented violence. Violence is something that is really a part of the children's life on video game, even if it's in the hip-hop industry through rap music and etc. And we need to be honest in addressing that. The thing that has happened last week in the state of Georgia, for an example, a young African-American male went into, he's 16, he went into the girls' bathroom and raped a 15-year-old young lady. The school had to act upon that.
But that's not on the borderline of zero tolerance. That's criminal conduct.
Well, but how do we, my thing is that at some point, Ray, we have to be.
But I take it that when Ellen says that trivial conduct is being drawn into a web of harsh punishment,
well,
she's not talking about rape. She's saying things that are clearly at a different
That's something that I believe that our leadership have to be honest in looking at. How do we address that? If children are having those type of thoughts or speaking those type of issues, then the guidance counselor should come in, the parents should be brought in, and they should deal with it aggressively. My concern is more so about the guns and the violence and the knives.
I guess what I'm saying, when you have two 8-year-olds arrested, whether for good cause or not, that's a more serious response than counseling. And the question is, are we doing it in situations where it's not appropriate? Let me ask Ellen, because I know you wanted to speak.
Well, I wanted to respond to what the Assemblyman had said, which is, I believe what I heard him say was those 8-year-olds, if they had said something to the effect of, "I'm going to kill you," they should be taken out of the classroom. Fine. They were taken out of the classroom, and I believe they were handcuffed. They were brought to the police station. They were held in police custody.
Not handcuffed, but taken down in police cars to police headquarters.
Right. So where's the teachable moment there for these children? What have they learned? Has anyone redirected their typical, appropriate 8-year-old conduct. I'm going to kill you. That's a typical 8-year-old statement. Has anyone redirected that in a positive way and taught that child how to express themselves in a way that isn't offensive to other people? Not in this situation at all. Instead, their conduct, which I think is typical, was criminalized. So what's the message we're sending to those children and to their classmates?
Ellen Boylan mentioned a teachable moment, Assemblyman. It seems to me that one might ask whether, in the context of this situation, it's appropriate to look for a teachable moment, some way to get a lesson out of this, or indeed take 2 8-year-olds downtown.
No question about it, Ray, but what's happening here is we're focusing on a single piece of legislation passed in 1995 and not on a whole host of other legislation.
But we are looking at a set of policies and attitudes that have been inspired partly, but not exclusively, by that legislation.
Right. The question is, what is a teachable moment? A teachable moment is that you recognize where there may be a problem, and then you deal with it. You deal with it through counseling, you deal with it through a whole host of other issues, but you don't allow it to remain in the classroom. Now, this issue in Irvington may have been totally innocent. I have no idea. And I would hope that the teacher exercised good judgment before he or she called the police in. But what we're talking about here is a zero-tolerance policy that deals with handguns and weapons and threats of violence and actual violence. And I think if you talk to parents around this state and every other state, you'll say they agree. You'll see that they agree with that 100%.
But with children, obviously, threats of violence involve some interpretation. We should point out that it was a substitute teacher involved, which is maybe yet another issue. Ellen, I didn't get a chance to ask you a question I did ask Emmanuel, and that is the question of the racial disparity in numbers. Does that mean anything in your view, that there are disproportionate numbers of
it
black?
means a lot. It's one of the problems with zero tolerance is it disproportionately impacts children of color and children with disabilities who historically have been denied educational opportunity.
But is that happening because there are more violations?
There's been pretty solid research conducted over the past few years. Some comes to mind out of the University of Indiana, Professor Russ Giba, showing that it's not based on the fact that children of color or children with disabilities are involved in more infractions or are breaking the rules more. It's more an unequalness or unfairness in application of policy. So yeah, that means a lot to me. That's a big problem. I mean, we fought for years in this country to gain educational opportunity for these children, and now in the guise of zero tolerance, we're reverting back to exclusion.
Emmanuel, let me give you a shot at the teachable moment idea, because it does seem to me that we're talking about situations where there has to be ambiguity because you're dealing with children. And the correct response is important. Do you see that this moment with those 8-year-olds could have led possibly to another response other than the police?
Raymond, of course I'm very sensitive to the two fathers. I'm a father myself. I have 5 sons. And I think that we need to be very careful in this process. Again, I agree with the Assemblyman in reference to guns and other acts of violence, but on the trivial end, that may be something that the state and the Education Commissioner and the new administration need to look at and evaluate as we move forward. But again, we cannot tolerate having these youngsters come to these schools and being disruptive. The trivial issues we need to deal with, and that's going to take strong, positive leadership to make that happen and to let parents and the community feel safe about sending their children to school. However, again, we cannot, the tragedy that happened to these 2 young men, we cannot afford to happen to others. I mean, we will have to address that.
Assemblyman, unlike the floor of the Assembly, we can give you 20 seconds to tell us what's next up in terms of legislation on this issue.
Well, the legislation I have really addresses statutorily mandating reporting on violence in schools and on guns being transported to schools and the adjudication of those who have transported guns to schools. That's a piece of legislation I have pending. It doesn't change the standard. It doesn't apply zero tolerance to any other items, but it mandates the reporting, which is currently only required by rule. We want it mandated by statute.
Ellen, let me make you for a second the Assemblyman's chief aide. What would you propose, what would you suggest he might do in the legislature, or is there anything that the legislature can do in terms of this question?
Well, I think there needs to be a change in the law to require that student discipline always be individualized. and that children's needs are taken into consideration, that circumstances, facts are looked at, that professionals, the school social worker, school psychologist, etc., evaluate a child.
Let me see if Emmanuel would agree with that as we go on.
Well, I agree with life skills for anyone. I also believe that our system need to take a very look at the culture that is now growing within our educational system.
Looks like we have to come back and revisit this very important issue because we've gotten a lot of insightful comments. Thank you all. That's it for this edition of Due Process. But we hope you'll join us next week when we'll be back with another cutting-edge issue of law and social justice. Until then, for Sandy King and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
With a piece of notebook paper.
It's a serious charge.
Yes, and they still got the charge on them. The prosecutor dropped it, but until our lawyers can get it off, they're trying to say that these two little babies got a record into the 18 for playing with a piece of paper.
It got my mind wondering about this society, just like him, and he's a kid. And he's asking me grown-up questions.
It isn't fair in a case like this. It isn't fair when the charges shouldn't have been brought in the first place. It isn't fair when you see your child go through what these children have gone through. It isn't fair to have to go through an expense to do that. It just isn't fair in light of the facts that occurred in this case.
But it is the way it is.
That's the system.
Major funding for Due Process was made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding was provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual,